Hey everyone, it's Mike with Foster Devops, and I'm going to start showing you how to get started with Backstage. If you haven't seen my previous video, go ahead and check it out. But Backstage is an IDP framework, internal developer platform framework that allows your organization to bootstrap a software catalog and much more. Backstage is really effective when you can use the plugins, but for this initial bootstrap, we'll just show what comes out of the box with Backstage. So to begin, Backstage has some requirements. And the first requirement is, while developing locally, you want to bootstrap with a Linux machine or a Mac OS machine, which are both Unix-based. You can also use Windows subsystem. For this tutorial, I'll be using a Mac OS, so I won't need to download the Windows subsystem, but follow that link if you are interested in that with a Windows operating system. Next, you'll need some build environment tools. For Linux, that includes the Make tool and the Build Essentials packages. And then for Mac, you'll need the Xcode Dev Tools. The Xcode Dev Tools get installed when you download Xcode from the App Store. And then on opening, you'll be able to click Xcode Dev Tools and download them from the pop-up. Next, you'll need a Node.js runtime. Backstage and I both use NVM. A Node.js alternative would work, but NVM is very effective at managing your Node.js version, and you can switch versions between projects very easily. You can follow this link to see the tutorial of downloading NVM. To download NVM, you will need curl to install it on your machine, but just go through the terminal and that tutorial and it should be pretty good. The package manager for this application is Yarn. Backstage has its own CLI and it utilizes Yarn to interact with the application and install the dependencies as well as run the application. Yarn is very straightforward to install as well. Once you get to containerizing the application for deployment, you will need a Docker runtime. I prefer Rancher Desktop over Docker Desktop. Docker Desktop is simply just a container or Docker engine, whereas Rancher Desktop can run Containerd as well, which is the next way to start running containers. So I highly recommend downloading Rancher Desktop over Docker Desktop for your container runtime. As well as you will need Git. So go ahead, follow these links and download all of these requirements. All of these links will be in the description below, so they should be very straightforward to download and get started with. On top of these system requirements, you will also need a way to interact with the command line. So I am currently running a terminal emulator. iTerm2 on Mac OS is very popular as well, but there's also Warp. It's this really cool tool that has AI integrations, code sharing, and much more. Highly customizable terminal. I highly recommend it. You can use this link to download Warp, and you can see how cool my setup is once we get into it. So now I can show you Warp and the terminal. So right now I have all of those dependencies installed. And I can show you NPM version. will return 16.2 or 16.20. And I have Git and Yarn installed as well. I'm in my home directory right now. And what I want to do is change directory. Let me blow that up for you. And if you're wondering, this alias up here, or this sort of terminal declaration, is from Starship, and we can have a separate video to get my setup going. But this is warp, and I can change directories to my desktop and Foster Desktop Devops. And what I did to autocomplete there was just a tab. You can see this is an empty directory. And the first way to bootstrap Backstage is by running this npx command. It's very similar to how you would start a Node application or a React application, except it will be backstage/create app, and I will tag it with the latest version. And now we will enter a name. So this name will be the name of your name of the directory that Backstage will be in, and I will call it Foster Devops-Backstage. We can see it's beginning the install. Now with Node, if you have a different version installed, you will run into an issue with this yarn install. Since I have 16.20 installed, I won't run into an issue, but I'll change the Node version and do a buggy installation after we get this initial bootstrap going. So you can see we'll wait till this package is installed and have that running. In the meantime, I have some custom key bindings for my work. I can do control comma and call this Backstage, and you can see in the top left, that's where I'm editing. I will call this Foster Devops Backstage. You can see my title in that top has changed as well. And then with warp, I can do a command T, create a new tab, and I will call this one bug Backstage. And in this terminal, we will create a error. But we can go back to this first one, and it's still waiting for the install. And now it looks like it installed, and we successfully created the application. And you can see we can install the dependencies again, but we want to run the application. It gives us these commands right here to run the application. And I will show you right now. I can do cd Foster Devops. Well, first, let's see the directory in there. So that Foster Devops Backstage is where my application for Backstage will live. And I can do Foster Devops Backstage. And this is the directory structure that Backstage out of the box comes with. I'm not going to go into every single one of the files within this directory, and that is for a later video. And now to start the Backstage application, we will use yarn, and we will use a yarn dev. And this will start the back end and the front end at the same time. You can see that it does a yarn start and yarn start back end. And once we get this Webpack compiled successfully, we can go back to our browser and look up localhost 3000. And here's our Backstage instance. So it's really straightforward as that. You can start poking around. You can see that this component is a component straight from the Bootstrap. You can get some data like the life cycle, the owner is guests because we have no defined groups. You can see there's a system and an API all connected to this component. And there's some tabs, and we'll get into these plugins later. You can also see this scaffolding tool to create a new template with a form to fill out to create that template. This Backstage instance can't really do much until we create some components. And you can see that I'm just a guest and I have no authentication providers. So those would be the next steps, is to bootstrap the authentication providers for SSO, as well as set up the integrations for GitHub or Azure Devops. And then also, right now, this component is stored in SQLite memory, which will be in the browser data. We want to set up a persistent data store or database using PostgreSQL. So that's another bootstrapping step to get you started. But you can see that I have my Backstage instance running. There might have been an issue bootstrapping for you. So now I will quickly go through some error handling. So I'm going to switch to this second terminal by doing Command 2 in Warp, and I can see my Docker daemon is not running, but I will close these ports and start a new Backstage. So you can see I'm above the other Backstage. I want to check my node version. Okay, so I have node version 16.20 running. Let's use node version 14. And I'll install 14. And I'm doing this to show what would happen if you have an incorrect node version. Use Python. Let's use install. I might need to use Python 2.7. Okay, cool. So I do use 14. Okay, now I am using node version 14, and let's see what happens when I try to install Backstage or bootstrap a Backstage directory in Foster Devops. So I will do the npx at Backstage create latest app, and you can see Warp autofills this, so I'll do a right arrow and enter. And I will go through the same as before, and I will call this bug Backstage because we should, yes. We run into this error, and that's because of the node version we're using. And to check that, what I would do is make sure I'm on node version 16, and I can check that by doing nvm version. And I see I'm on 14. So let's change back to NVM use 16. You can see that we are using 16.20 now. And let's bootstrap Backstage again. And we can call this fixed Backstage. And you can see we have a successful yarn install. So there's a very common error that I've found using NVM where I don't have the correct node version. I'll run into that issue. But with that, you should be bootstrapped with Backstage and ready for the rest of the series. So thanks, everyone, and I hope to begin your Backstage journey with you. All right, take care.